Welcome to the 10th anniversary of SPAN. It really does not feel like 10 years. I just can't even believe it. I'm honored to be, my name is Mark Davis. I'm honored to be this year's president of SPAN. And we've been doing SPAN now for 10 years, and it really doesn't feel like it. It feels like really yesterday that we were at the WAC with the Brainards. And for those of you that were there, it really, I know, John, you were there. It was really very, very special to get this started the way we did. And I'm going to have a little backstory on it in a minute. But today we have 38 people that have never been to SPAN. So we have a lot of new people. So if we could recognize the 38 people that have not been here before and give you a big round of applause. Now, please stand up. Please stand up. That is just awesome. We're so thrilled that you're here. And we really hope you come back on March 8th when we're fortunate to have Suzanne McGill and her father, Jim Senegal, speak to us at SPAN. So mark that on your calendar. It's great, Jim and Suzanne, that you're here today. 10 years ago when we started SPAN, we weren't sure if this was really going to work. So Paul Shoemaker said, well, I think we really should have Paul and Debbie Brainerd be our first presentation, which we did at the WAC. And somebody asked the question of the Brainards. They said, now, when you work with advisors, can you give us some tips on what to do? And she said, well, it's pretty simple. I mean, when we meet an advisor for the first time, if they don't hug us, we will never do business with them. And Randy Ottinger and I looked at each other and says, I think we're onto something. And of course, Debbie Brainerd's hug ratio went up dramatically after that. So for those of you that have not been to SPAN before, we have two sequences here. It's pretty simple. We have a conversation, and it's today with the Wright family. We're just thrilled that the Wright family is here today. And thank you, Jane Searing, for organizing it, and she will be leading the discussion. And then we serve the lunch. So the lunch comes after the discussion, and then we have a table conversation. So we have a table captain at each table, we hope. So if you'll please raise your hand if you're a table captain. Okay, they know what to do if you're new. I mean, they're in charge. So listen to them. And at the end, we'll have some closing remarks, and we'll be done at 1:30. So lunch will start right around 1:45. The conversation lasts about half an hour or longer, depending on Q&A. There is time for Q&A as well. So if you have some question to ask the Wright family, be thinking about that. So we do have sponsors, and if you would like to be a sponsor of SPAN, please let me know, or Terry Dam know. But these sponsors have been with us for a long time, and we also have some new sponsors. And without the sponsors, we really couldn't do SPAN like we do. So I'd like to recognize them. If you please hold your applause till the end. Bloodworks Northwest, Clark Newber CPAs, D.A. Davidson Trust Company, Del Prado Philanthropy, thanks Lorraine Del Prado, Ernst & Young, Evergreen Plan Giving, Filament Advisors, Goldman Sachs, excuse me, Helsel Fetterman, Pacific Continental Bank, which is now Columbia Bank, Pratt Legacy Advisors, U.S. Private Wealth Management, which is a division of U.S. Bank, Wellspring Group, thank you, Judy, and Whittier Trust. If we could give our sponsors a great applause. So we're going to get right into our conversation here with the Wright family, and to do that, you can start coming up. Jane Searing will be leading the conversation. Now, Jane has been the tax partner at Clark Newber for years, who's built sort of their philanthropy practice in the tax area, and has been the treasurer of SPAN for 8 years and on the board. And she will introduce the members of the Wright family, and we'll start our discussion.
Great, thanks, Mark. Is this on? Am I on now? How about now? Can you hear me now? I feel like that commercial, right? So again, thank you for coming today. 10 years doesn't feel like 10 years. Well, I haven't been involved for 10 years, so that's why it doesn't feel like 10 years to me. Okay. But really, and thank you to Mark and to, I think, Joe and who else? And Paul were the original founders that are still here today. And I believe that Mark has been the president the entire 10 years. And every board meeting he says, "So you ready for me to retire?" I'm like, "Nope, you're good. You just keep doing that. We like that." And thank you to Terry, too, who is the organizer of all things. If you ever need an organizer, Terry's your gal. And thank you to the Wright family and the extended Wright family who are here. When you're in a family, it's like, "So we'd like you to come and share all your family secrets." Like, yeah, we're all open for that. That's great. So we do really appreciate all of you for being here, and especially Sally and Kyle. And then they invited Sarah Hopper, who is the newest member of our board, the SPAN board, to come and talk. What do you do when you have a Philanthropic Advisors Network? You bring your philanthropic advisor to the stage to help you with that. First, we have Sally Wright. The Wright family, they're super organized. So I'm going to say that it might be the in-laws who have really organized them, because they've conveniently numbered their generations. Super helpful when you're talking about them. So Howard Wright, the construction guy, he was G3. And Sally is married to David, who is G4. Kyle is G5, and there are also some little G6s around. They're not on the board, but so when we're talking about them, that's who we're talking about. Sally's a G4, Kyle's a G5. We'll use their names, but when we start slipping into the G4s and G5s that we're not talking about British Secret Service. We're talking about these guys.
We each have our own number as well. We don't even
Yeah. But it's fun when you're doing that. The Wright family, they're a great choice for this. I mean, they're from a Seattle philanthropic and just leaders in the community. When you think about community engagement, Howard, what I think of senior, I realize he's the second. I think of the Horsey cartoon when he passed away. There was a Seattle skyline. And by the way, the little pins, we do have permission, by the way, they're okay with it. They think of it as free advertising. There was a Horsey cartoon that, it had the Space Needle in the skyline of Seattle as a tribute to Howard, which is just, that's how I think of, but it's more than that. It's more than construction. It's more than the Space Needle. It's all the boards and community service. And they also have a family foundation that is not named Wright any longer. It is the Grousmont Foundation. And so I'm going to have Sally start with giving a brief, and not too brief, but just an overview of the family foundation and how they use the family foundation to, as a charitable vehicle for the family. So I'll let you start.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for having us. I guess it's too late to back out now. We're happy to share. We go to conferences, and we know you learn from sharing with other fellow, and that's really exciting. That Susie, I'll come back in March to hear your story. So those of you that don't know, my father-in-law started the foundation in 1984. His best buddy, Tom Foster, and his daughter, Lee Rolfe, Kyle's mother, were on the board. It was mostly a pass-through. They just, did grants. And then, as you might know, he died really young at age 69 in 1996. So it took a couple years for the foundation, the estate, to settle. And when it did, the estate picked the 5 women in the family. So my sister-in-law, Kate Janeway, over here, is married to the oldest, and I'm married to the youngest, David. Early on, in 2001, they chose me to be the president. And I think that's been 16 years now. So we don't have term limits, obviously. We have no paid staff. We've hired many consultants over the years to help us, do the one-on-one interviews that the family doesn't want to come out and tell you, but those interviews really help. I see John Goodwin over there. He was one of our first consultants. Thanks, John. And then in 2006, a little controversial, we changed the name to Grousmont Foundation. And we did that. Our other family foundation, as you might know, is Norcliffe. And we kind of liked that anonymous, not our last name aspect, I guess. You don't get asked as many times, maybe. people don't know you. And also my mother-in-law, Ty Schumann, they were divorced. She really wanted actually to come join her family. And we kind of felt like, well, if we change the name, then she would maybe feel more welcome to their family. That's where they grew up in Redmond on a farm called Grousemont. And then in 2011, we hired Sarah because we have 13 G5s, because I'm his aunt, if maybe it's hard to tell. But we just thought we gotta figure out the next generation. We gotta get them involved, and many of them are married now, and obviously we allow in-laws on the board. So in 2014, we brought Kyle and his cousin Aaron Wright on our board. And we really wanted to be peers. We wanted them to have full voting rights. We didn't want a junior board. We looked at that. And so that is fairly new for us. A little bit of background on our giving. We're really balanced, I'd say. We do a lot of capital civic grants, as Howard, really like to make Seattle a better place. We obviously support our family members who are asked to co-chair many nonprofit areas. We do our Seattle Center neighbors. And then we do youth programming. And we really feel like the youth is sort of, where your future holds you. And we're pretty balanced. We do arts and we do environment and we do international. We picked Guatemala recently to do some youth programming down there. I think we're also fortunate that we have 2 working companies in our family with the Space Needle, and then we have a real estate holding firm. And I think that helps when you have a working company to bring you together. We have retreats every 2 years, and that's a fun way to get together, learn about your history, learn about your values passing on. And that's where we did just change our generation count, because we think it's great that we're 4th and 5th and 6th now still here. So that's kind of the background.
Thanks, Sally. So Kyle, we're going to go to you now to tell us a little bit about your increased involvement and your generation, your sibling, not siblings, but cousinal siblings, I guess. Your generational, and you're coming on because I think it's interesting. A lot of times foundations, and that's not just foundation boards, but public charity boards will create this junior board. And your foundation decided not to do that you are full board members, but how that went about, and maybe talk a little bit about Sarah's facilitation of that, and so how that worked for you.
Sure. Thank you for having us, first of all. It's nice to be here. You did mention that we have running family businesses, and we have a large family, sometimes we call it an enterprise because we're doing a lot of different things together as a family, and that's been one of our big initiatives recently, is figuring out next generation. And the foundation board is really blazing that path. They're way ahead of the rest of the family as far as getting my generation involved in things. And so we didn't have a junior board per se, but there was, I suppose officially it was a committee. Mm-hmm. And it was a totally separate board designed entirely for my generation. I should say my generation, there's 13 of us, not including any of our spouses, and we range from 14 years old to 38 years old. So it's difficult to figure out how to initiate that wide range of ages. And they were very thoughtful about it and decided, no, we don't want them to shadow us, or they don't want them to just come in and sit in a back seat until they feel more comfortable. And instead, they created a separate committee which effectively acted as its own independent board called we were G3 back then, we've mixed around the numbers, very confusing, but they called it the G3 board, and they helped by providing professional support through Sarah, and they also gave us a certain amount of money and said, you guys are on your own to grant this money however you see fit. Obviously, you have the support to make it work, but we're not going to stand over your shoulder. We're not going to dictate how you distribute those funds. And then before we would be asked to join the official Grousemont board, we would have to work a certain amount of years on this G3 board, get the correct experience, and show willingness and interest to join the full board. So that's kind of the high-level summary, and I think it's worked really well. We've refined it every year, and that's how it happened.
Yep. That's great. So Sarah, why don't you talk a little bit about when you're coming on board and the role that you played, and how that worked.
So Sally and Kyle have both referenced the beginning of my role with the foundation, and that was really hired to help develop these G5, then G3, now G5 programs. And what was really great about the foundation board when they hired me was that we had an agreement, which Kyle alluded to a bit, which was that this board, this committee of Next Generation was completely autonomous, and I got to work for them directly. If they wanted to share what they were doing, they could. If they didn't have to. There was no pressure or requirement or vetting that was done by the parents' generation, which I think really was a great launching pad because it allowed them to take risks. It gave them the autonomy and the confidence-building experience to really become pretty sophisticated grant makers in their own right. The other part of the agreement was that we decided that in order to have an even fuller experience around philanthropy and also just start to think about individual, kind of where you come from individually with your own values and how that might align with your involvement in the community financially and through volunteering or commitments otherwise. Each individual member of G5 has their own allowance to give to an organization of their choice. So it's age-appropriate amounts, different for Kyle than for the 14-year-old. And they had, again, the autonomy and to go and find and identify a cause and an organization that was important to them, and then purely, through their own initiative, submit it to the board to make the grant in their name. So that combination of things, I think, was very thoughtful on the behalf of the board to really have it work that way and have it launch that way with so much autonomy. My role has evolved, I would say, over the years to include other aspects of planning and development with the foundation. I think, one of the things that we realized, the board and I, after a couple of years of G5 was, okay, this is great. They're getting all this experience in philanthropy. So what's next for them? What do they get to do now? And so then Sally and Kate and all of the board members sort of realized, well, we have to start to build a governance structure and an operational structure so that we can actually have something that we're really inviting them to. The Grassmont Foundation at that time was run beautifully and efficiently and making great impact in the community, and everything was basically in Sally's head. And so to be able to really start to think about what are some of the policies, what is the governance structure, what are we not only what are we inviting them to be part of as board members, once we create the criteria for what it means to be a board member, like Kyle described, but how do we actually create the structure where we have something to invite them to, that they know what it's about, if you will. So that was a process, and then I think the other pieces of the work that we've done over the years have been around really planning and thinking about the foundation as and the potential growth of the foundation, not only of the board, of bringing younger generations onto the board, but also of the potential asset growth of the foundation and what that looks like from a grant-making perspective, from a programmatic perspective, from a family involvement perspective. And then the other thing, the only other piece that I will add too that I've played a role in, but it's really been, again, just the foresight, I think, of the board that has done such a great job is I would say almost a programmatic but also a cultural transition that the foundation has had around going from, as Sally described it, a pass-through foundation that was set up by Howard's buddy, and Howard made his grants to his buddy's organizations and wonderful civic grants in the city, but that was sort of the way it worked for him during his lifetime, to finding a way that amazingly continues to honor the past, continues to honor those previous generation, also honors the civic work of current generations, the work of family members who are co-chairing large campaigns or on boards of organizations who are doing endowment fundraising and honoring the work of those family members in a significant way, and also continuing to have a program, evolving, relevant programmatic side, which is the youth programming that Sally described. So balancing this in this wonderful way, honoring the past, honoring and celebrating the work that current family members are doing in the community now, as well as helping youth in the community in a variety of different ways. So it's been a wonderful journey. I enjoy it very much.
So maybe both of you could follow up on that a little bit. So Sally, maybe you first, and then Kyle, you know, in order. So Sally, your role in your generation, how you have sort of honored the, you know, when it was more about capital spending and capital endowment and what your and then Kyle, your generation, and then, you know, building it for the next generation after that. Maybe you could build on that.
Sure. I mean, back in the day, we all had kids, so the 5 women on the board decided, well, youth is sort of a great area to support, and we just mostly did after-school programs. We didn't have a ton of money back then to support stuff, but when we brought on the next generation, we thought, let's explore. We went around the table. What are you guys interested in? And everyone said, of course, a different area of focus. We said, well, why don't we do all 6 of the general areas, and let's learn. And we bring in speakers to educate us. We have kind of cycles every 3 years. And that's been really nice, because I might be more interested in maybe the educational piece. Kate is certainly interested in the environmental piece. We all have aspects of international and just, you know, different areas that are fun to learn and to hear what the community needs. You know, I think that's the key. When you're, you know, you have a public trust, you know, it's just not for your own cause anymore. You're looking out for your community. So it's been nice, yeah.
Yeah, I would say that's going to continue to be a challenge. And the great thing about Sally and the generation above is that they have really been interested in our thoughts, of course. You know, I dare say that our G5 committee actually, you know, provided some insight to the main board on some of the ways we did our grant giving, because it was a little different. But just to be asked, you know, for the first time for a lot of us in my generation, what do you guys want to do with this foundation is extremely empowering. And I think a lot of family foundations nationally are considering, you know, granting down all of their gifts over the next couple of years, whereas currently we are maintaining ours. But that's not something that's set in stone, and we know we're going to be a part of that decision-making process going forward. So it's a great opportunity, but it's also a learning experience, because we're forced to really think deeply about those decisions. What's important to us? What's going to be important to Seattle? And you know, what's the political implications of the next 20 years? These are the type of challenges that we wouldn't normally get to deal with. And so it's a huge gift. It's a huge responsibility, and being a part of that has been the most important part, I think, for my generation at least.
So before I let you guys ask questions, I'm just one more question about the, you know, if it wouldn't be the Philanthropic Advisors Network if we didn't ask the question about advisors. And I know you've used a few advisors over time. So when you have selected advisors, so what is the process that you've gone through of identifying when you need an outside advisor, and then the process for selecting advisors, and when you felt like you've needed a change, or, you know, what's been sort of the process you've gone through?
Well, like we have an outside investment committee, and that's on, we have other board member or other family members on an investment committee, and so they recently said maybe it's time to change investment firms, and that's a nice to have other, you know, people helping us with that decision. We use Jane, so we're not leaving you anytime soon. We've had Sarah for 6 years. I think you get a feel for you're stagnant or there's something you're missing. Like I said, it really has helped us to have the advisors interview one-on-one family members that can be very confidential, and then provide us with what the feedback was, and that can direct us in our policies and everything going forward.
Does anybody have a question they'd like to ask? Both an opportunity here. You have 2 generations.
So 2 questions. One is, when you think about being across 6 different potential categories, how do you measure the effectiveness
Yeah, certainly, and that's sort of why we did it every 3 years. So, like for instance, we just gave to the Rwanda Girls Initiative, Susie's, and it really helped us because now every year we get an update from them, and we kind of track the pulse, and then when the 3 years is up and we hit that cycle again, we are, for sure we're going to re-up and give back to you guys for the next cycle, and that's helped us to be a little more connected, to give maybe to less organizations but have more deep impact. Because we don't do a lot of multi-year gifts, but we track them for the 3 years when we do choose our grants.
And I would say to that point, we've tried really hard, and this is something that I'm interested in, not to insist that metrics are the only way to determine whether our money is being spent correctly. I think we've started to put more emphasis on choosing who we give to, understanding what they're doing and why they're doing it, and then trusting that they're going to spend it wisely. I think adding more layers of work for the grantees is just a negative impact overall. So it's been hard because you want to be able to say, okay, show me where that money went and tell me all the great things you've done because of me, Yeah. But we've tried to resist that impulse.
Well, I think I know what you're saying. Do we partner with other organizations? We just recently did that with Sound Mental Health. We partnered with the Initial Foundation. They were taking care of a middle school. They have middle school counselors in schools, and we thought it's great to piggyback on what they set up. They just needed a little more money. And then your first question was, do we have? No, there's probably no reason someone could come to us that didn't have a certain amount of length or how big they are. But we are unsolicited. So truthfully, that's why we have this woman down here on my left. She brings us, we pick the focus, and she brings us probably the 10 or 12. And that sort of is a way to sort of not get too much mail.
Yeah. And maybe you can talk a little bit to this, but we also bring in call them industry professionals when we choose the focus that we're going to be working on. If it's environment, at the beginning of that process, we bring somebody in to tell us what's the state of the state, what's going on in the environmental giving arena. And so I think a large part of it is who do they know and who are they going to recommend. And so I'm not sure how to answer your question. I'm guessing you're wondering how do younger grantees get in the hopper, so to speak. And I think a lot of it is word of mouth and communication and relationships, like everything else, I suppose.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great summary. And the grant making process is invite only, as Sally and Kyle have said. And one of the great things about the Grassmont Foundation is that they do general operating. So to Kyle's point, we look at an organization. Doesn't necessarily have to be been in existence for 100 years or a certain size, but through the due diligence process, the board really takes into account all aspects of that organization, including what a certain size gift would do to that budget, but thinks through the leadership and the ability and effectiveness of the organization to do the work that it's doing, and then really gives full rein to that organization with unrestricted funds for the most part. Some go to certain programs, but for the most part, it's unrestricted. So that is a great part of it. And then Kyle's what Kyle was talking about is sort of an experts panel that we bring in once a year to give the board an idea from folks who are on the ground working in the community, in the areas that we're going to be funding, so that the board can think through kind of what criteria, what's really urgent, what's really important that's happening in environmental education, for instance, that we need to be sure that the organizations that we decide to fund are focusing on so that it's relevant to the needs of the community.
That's a very good question, and Kate, correct me. So, are we using our foundation values on the investing side of the investments of the foundation? And Kate, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think up to this point the answer is no. We haven't really been doing that. However, we're going through a shift right now to really analyze and think harder about impact investing, because it's really a grant in its own right. So we're working on it.
Yeah, and I just went to a conference, and that was a trend I saw, is, we give away 5%, but we have 95% also to do some good in the world. So I think that's a trend you'll see.
I have a comment and a related question. I think it's amazing the legacy that Howard Sr. has set up here for the family. The family's split apart for all kinds of reasons, and here now there's these generations that are bound together and kind of have to talk things out and towards some values. I think that's an amazing legacy. The prevalence of donor advised funds and, say, community foundations is something newer and wasn't there some generations ago. Do you think there's changes for G6 and 7 that they may want some different type of structure that's less communal?
I think a lot of times geography comes into play as we mostly live here, but that's a big part, big expense to when you start dispersing your next generation. And yeah, I guess no one realizes how much paperwork and time with this lady you spend when you have a foundation instead of just a community fund. But I don't know, it feels right for our family our size to do the foundation, and we certainly have Norcliffe to look up to too, as our other family foundations. So, yeah.
You might talk about when you lived temporarily abroad.
Lived because.
You were living abroad for a little bit while you
Yeah.
were president of the foundation.
Oh, well, actually, officially, Corinne took over for me. But yeah, I did live abroad for 1 year. Yeah, as a family.
Question, how does Norcliffe and your foundation interact in terms of ideas that you partner in on, or?
We wait for them to give,
We
and
don't
then we
speak to
just
them.
follow suit. They put a few more zeros on it than us. No, my husband's on that board right now, and they're sort of unique. They're only bloodline. They don't let the in-laws in. So my husband always laughs. He's like, "You should be on this board, not me." But very well respected. We get together. They just have a new executive director recently, and we get together with them. And obviously we're very tight. We just had a family Christmas dinner, and we go every 3 years. We get together as the picket side, and yeah, it's a nice connection to have. Very lucky.
If you were starting this all over today for any of our clients or any of our friends or our families, what would you recommend to that family who's about to go through it?
I'll start. Only in relation to younger generations, I'll speak to that. I think one of the things that was mentioned earlier, and perhaps the older generations might overlook, is that, like somebody mentioned, Sally had everything in her head. I know that's not exactly correct, but the generation, my parents' generation, they understood, they had common values, they grew up together, and they all were going in the same direction. So there wasn't as much of a need to have written guidelines or even principles to a certain extent. Not that they didn't, but it wasn't as necessary. My generation of 13, and double that with spouses, you need to write those things down. You need to take the time and the effort and the conscious work to decide, why are we sticking together as a family? Should we even stick together as a family in this endeavor? Because when you're younger and you're trying to join or interested in joining something like that, my parents' generation, I don't think appreciated how confusing it can be. So get those values, that mission, those clear guidelines on paper. What is expected of you? What do you need to do in order to get there? And then what are you expected to do when you're there? Those types of things are really essential.
Yeah, forced family fun. I think we all know families are complicated, and that's a good point. I mean, I've heard a lot of family foundations that split up because they just can't get along. That won't happen to us, obviously. But it is something to think about. And geography makes it tricky too, as you get bigger and people start moving away to actually come together. You know, what area do you want to support? But I think foundations are a great tool to keep families together. You know, you have to come together for the common good, you know, for something unselfish. And so far, so good. I'll do another 16 years.
To that point, you actually do have a couple of family rules, which that you've. I know you said that every year you go back and you just re-examine, but you do have a couple. For example, one branch can't. So maybe you just run down a couple of the rules that you actually do have. That
Sure.
Because you do actually have a few rules.
Yeah, so there's 5, we call them branches, and we've said maybe no more than 10 board members at a time, just for ease, but one branch can't have more than 50% on that side. But we don't need to have everyone represented either. If some family branch isn't interested right now, there's no pressure for them to be represented. But the 50%, yeah. If you got divorced, you'd probably lose your seat. You know, that's written down, unfortunately. But we welcome the in-laws. You know, so yeah. And then to Kyle's point on the second generation, just ask them to do a little training beforehand. You know, it feels like some of the younger kids, aren't on boards yet or aren't in the other side of asking for money and seeing that side of it. So this is sort of new for them to be on a board. So there is a little bit of training going on, and to read the 990 takes some work.
She's being modest. There's a lot more written down than you give yourself credit for.